Hi everyone, and thanks for having me today. You know, there's nothing worse in my genealogy research than finding a tidbit of information or finding an online tree that I think may know more about a relationship than I do, contacting that person, and that person is either dead or they've inherited their mother's or their grandmother's research and they know nothing. And so today we're going to talk about what we can do to help future generations, because it's really on us at this period of time to do what we can to help the generations that are coming behind us. So let's talk a little bit about our physical research. What's going to happen to your research when you die? I think the thing that really drove this home to me is I contacted a distant cousin in California, and she's in a nursing home, and I had some questions for her, and she goes, I have those answers and it's in my research. And I said, would you like to email me, or could I call you back and we could talk about it later? And she goes, oh no, my research is all in my daughter's garage and I can't even get to it, and my daughter's not interested in genealogy, and so it's sitting in her garage. Well, did anybody else just get the picture I just got? It's piled up in the daughter's garage with the car and the bicycle and everything else, waiting for the old lady to die so the daughter can just trash it. So what's going to happen, and why does it matter? Well, even if you are so organized that your genealogy files look like this, or maybe you're a little bit more like me and your office looks a little bit more like this, well, guess what, folks? For most of us, nobody cares about this research after we die. Nobody in our immediate family, at least no one in my immediate family, cares about my research. It's like, oh yeah, Aunt Cindy does genealogy research, and when I need information for a school project, that's fine, but no one thinks that they might want to capture my research. So me, I'm smart. I'm of the younger generation, so my research is all in the cloud. No, I don't mean this big cumulus cloud that looks like it's going to make a thunderstorm later, but in the computer cloud. All of my research is actually located on a Google Drive. And how long is someone going to pay to keep my website up to date? And how long is he going to pay to keep my Google Drive information? And what's he going to do with it? He doesn't know what to do with it. So I've created a wish list. This is my wish list of what I think or what I hope to do to try to help those future generations and to answer those questions. First, I want details of the hard stuff, the things that took a long time to figure out. For example, I have a grandfather, his name is John Rutledge. He was born in 1801. It took us 10 years of hard, boots on the ground research before the internet to discover who his father was. Now, nowadays, with the advent of online records, it wouldn't have taken me 10 years. But still, it took 10 years. And the only piece of information to this day we have to prove who his father is, which was William, who was living in Ohio, is a court document that was filed in the Ohio District Court about his father William's probate. Now, if something happens to that courthouse in that record, it's now digital, it's online, so that helps, but that is the only piece of information. So I want to try to capture that, so when someone coming along behind me might have an opportunity to trip across that court record or my tree and find that court record and have that proof done and shorten their research by 10 years. So that deals me right into, I want proof of relationships. How do I know that my father was his father's son? Well, that's pretty easy with modern records. That's a birth certificate. But as all of us know, as we go farther back in time, proving those relationships gets harder and harder. And I would like to see a proof of the relationships. That seems to be what I spend a lot of my time contacting other genealogists for now. Is, you say that William, who's in Ripley County, Indiana, is the son of John, who's in Maryland. How do you know that? I know that John had a son William, but how do I know that that's the William that's in Ripley County? And usually people can't answer that. So if I have those answers, I want to try to make those available to the future genealogists. And of course I want source genealogies. That's everyone's pipe dream. And I don't mean to the GPS, to the genealogical proof standard. I mean source to the point where a competent genealogist coming along behind me has a chance to find that record, or at least knows what records I use, whether they can actually find them or not, to put together what the information is that I know. Now, I'm not talking about sources for all 10,000 relatives in your tree. I'm talking about the sources for your lines, for your direct lines and their ancillary lines of the people who you work with day to day. And the other thing I want to know is I want to know some stories about the people's lives. My Rutledge family lived in central Indiana, and all of a sudden a bunch of them started going out to Washington State and picking apples. Well, why did they do that, and how did they learn about the apple farms in Washington State? And what was their lure to the trains? A lot of them worked on the trains and rode the trains back and forth all over the country. And then my grandfather's sister, committed suicide in her outhouse. How did that affect the family? My grandfather never talked about it. I didn't know anything about it until I started researching that family. And then for me, what was it like to live through COVID? What are the challenges we've seen and the things we've had to deal with emotionally and physically to deal with COVID? What happened to you during the 2008 stock market crash? I had friends who lived in California, had their money in tech stocks. They both had to go back to work. So how do you deal with these day-by-day things? Because they are important, and they'll be important to our future generations. And then the last thing that we can all do simply and we can work on in the evenings is identifying pictures. And I'm going to show you later in the presentation a very simple example of what I mean by identifying pictures. So let's talk a little bit about the hard stuff. What relationships did you deal with that were hard to prove? Is there recurring research that you see in other people's trees that you know is incorrect, that just bothers you? Put a nugget out there and see if you can have some correct information for other people to find. How did you find out a super tough item? Or what have you done to try to figure something out that you haven't been successful with, that we can at least let future genealogists know what we tried and where we looked? It might help them figure out the problem. And if you've done title searches to identify land locations, which I have done, by all means, put that title search together and put it out there. And if you've had a relative who's had multiple marriages, name changes, or moved, I had one that had several of those things, detail that, because it will be so hard for future generations to track. One of the other things I've done that took me several months actually to complete was I decided to find the location of a piece of property in Maryland that was owned by my ancestor named Hopewell. Now, this was not easily traced down through land records, but I knew approximately where I thought it was. So I went online and I found a map, and the whole area happens to belong to a private airport now. So I picked some addresses on the map and I did title searches back, just like the title company does when you buy a house. And I was able to trace that land back all the way to 1671. And that verified the location where I believe that Hopewell lives. Now, this is a 7-page Word document with all the different deeds and all the title search information on it, but it also includes a picture of Google Earth, which is shows the present day airport, and I was able to lay out several other pieces of property I found along the way that pinpointed the location of Hopewell. Now, I sure want to leave that for a future researcher because it took me a long time to figure out. And why would they have to go back and pull all those deeds and read all that information when I have it right there for them in a Word document, 7 pages of a Word document. So that's another item that I want to make sure of my research that's part of my hard stuff that I want to try to leave a breadcrumb for future researchers. My next pet peeve is proof of relationships, and I happen to like lineage reports. It's not enough to collect birth, marriage, death records. You need to be able to prove how you know that that child is actually the child of the person you're purporting to be their parents. Now, I'm not talking about DNA, even though DNA has a place here, but I'm talking about is Jerry, who's on this birth certificate, and the father is listed as Edward and Mary Alice. That's pretty easy nowadays. But as we get back in time before birth certificates, we don't get that. We might get a birth announcement in an older newspaper, but how do you know? First with census records, but then how do you know after that, as you get earlier and earlier? How do you know that the John that's in Ripley County, Indiana, is actually the son of the guy who's in Maryland? And that's what I mean by proof of relationships. As we go farther and farther back in time, it becomes harder. But why not document the modern ones? Because it gets you in the rhythm of always looking for that proof. How do I know that this daughter was the daughter of this mother and not that mother? How do I know that this man was her father? How do I know, in the case of my nephew, the man that's on his birth certificate as his father wasn't his father at all? And we prove that with DNA. So in modern times it's pretty easy, but as you go back and back in distant times, a lot of times those evidence is widespread. So pull that evidence together for the future, use good citations, and put it in one place where they'll be able to find it, we hope. And of course, use DNA where you can to strengthen that argument of the paper evidence. So I just touched on this a bit, but remember, everyone has 2 trees. We have a family tree that's the people we grew up with and who raised us, and we go back through, and then we have a DNA tree. And some of us are lucky enough that that family tree and that DNA tree overlap and they're the same. But many people do not have that, and as they go farther back in time, they may have a DNA tree and then a traditional family tree. One of the things that I'm always interested in doing is to be able to survive challenges. For example, this is what I opened with. I'm researching the Rutledge family, and I cannot find evidence that William, who died in Muskingum County, Ohio, is the son of John, who died in 1828 in Maryland. This is the example I just gave you of William, who was the son of John C. I regularly go to people and say, you have this in your tree, can you help me prove it? And you know the answers I get. Well, I inherited my mother's research and that's what she had, so that's what's in my tree. I really don't know anything. Or, well, I got it from somebody else's tree, or I got it in this person's book, or I found it on Roots Web, and so I've just put it in my tree. But people don't have proof. And I want to be able to go to someone, when someone comes to me and asks me a question, I want to say, well, this is what I think, and this is why I think it, and this is the evidence I have that made me come to that conclusion. Do you have something else that can change my mind, or that can I change your mind? Can we work together to solve this problem? So let's talk a minute about source genealogies. And I'm probably glad that I'm not standing on a stage so you can't throw tomatoes at me. but I'm going to give you permission to not write sources to the genealogical proof standard. There are some sources that just do not need that level of detail if you are not writing in an academic setting, and I am not. I am writing for myself, and hopefully leaving a breadcrumb that some future generations might be able to find. But I expect those future researchers to have some level of skill before they are jumping into genealogy. So, for example, a census record written under the genealogical proof standard, the citation, ends up being this paragraph. To me, that makes no sense. If I've already said that James Herod was living in Callaway County, or Callaway, Kentucky in 1900, then my citation is going to be the 1900 U.S. Census for Callaway, Kentucky, James Herod. If I'm really nice, I might put the family number on it, if I'm feeling good. But in my mind, if a future person is not good enough, does not have the skills to find a simple census record, then I want them to go learn how to do research before they start researching anymore. But if your source is a book or another hard-to-find document, by all means give as much information as you can. And I even like to put internet links into the document. But remember that those internet links will probably not work in the future. Those sites may not hold those documents at the same places. They may not even exist. But at least it gives the future and me in the future a link to where I did find the evidence at the time. Now, through the years, I've found some great hints in the vertical files in the libraries. And if you don't use the vertical files in the libraries, investigate that and make sure you do. For example, this one I just happened to come across the other day is the genealogy of the American branch of the Pocock family. And you can see someone took the ink drawing that another person did, and they've improved upon it. Well, I've improved upon that even more. For example, Daniel Pocock down at the bottom, it looks like there's an arrow pointing up, so I assume that that's his father, since the person above was born in 1692 and Daniel Pocock was born in 1720. That works for a father. And I went and tried to source this information to try to verify it. Well, Daniel Sr., I found his will very easily. And this person says that he died in 27 August 1781. Well, he wrote his will on 7 August 1781, but it was submitted for probate on 10 August 1781. So if it was submitted for probate on 10 August, I doubt if he died on the 27th or 22nd. But Susanna, his wife, refused to administer the will on the 31st of July, 1784. So that makes me think that he may not have died until 1784 also. So I think the person just didn't write it down correctly, or I just can't read it correctly. But if she refused to administer on the 31st of July, then he probably died before July 31st, and so he probably died in, sometime in July, but certainly not in August. Now, there's also a witness's sworn statement in this same file that's dated 1785, and I'm going to assume that that's just an error on the part of the person who dated the document, because usually they wouldn't go a whole year without a witness's sworn statement, especially when I read this statement. So instead of saying that he died on the 22nd of August 1781, I can now say with confidence that he died between 7 August 1781 and 31 July 1784. And then if you look at the record below that, this person says that Daniel died 27 January 1800. Well, I found Reverend Coleman's church records in St. James Parish in Baltimore County, Maryland. And he did die in 1800. It's in the 1800 section. But Daniel actually died on April 28th. January 27th was on the row above. The person who wrote this down misread the document and put the date from the row above. But you did get the part, Daniel Pocock, aged 80 in St. James Parish. You did get that correct. But see, I've taken a hint, a document I found in a vertical file that had already been improved upon by someone, and by citing my sources, I can now verify or correct information that's on that vertical file. And I did that with several different sections of this file, and went and pulled out images, made a document. I actually used PowerPoint, made a slide like this to show the different information that I got, and that information is going back to the same library that owns this vertical file, so that a future researcher will know what I've already been able to correct. So now let's talk about DNA. I love DNA. But if you think about it, DNA and the information on our DNA matches is probably one of the most valuable things that we can leave to future researchers. How thrilled would you be if you knew who your grandmothers or great-grandmothers or great aunts or some distant cousin you never even knew you had's DNA matches were today? Think about that. Think about how your research could change if you just knew your grandfather's or your great-grandfather's DNA matches. Now, I'm fortunate. This is a fan chart of my family, and every one of those hearts is an ancestor, is a most recent common ancestor I have with a known match. So I am one of the most fortunate people that I have a good traditional family tree that also matches my DNA tree in most places. But wouldn't you love to have this information on your grandmother or your grandfather? Now, there are some people who aren't as lucky as me for a variety of reasons, low birth rates, low testing, but may have just a few common ancestors. But if you think about it, if you were born in 1920, and remember, autosomal DNA will do 4 to 5, sometimes 6 generations, so I'm talking about 4 generations that I may be able to identify the great-great-grandfather or grandparents of the person who was born in 1920 if they test. But by the time you get down to their grandchild, which let me tell you how this slide came about. My mother was born in 1920. If my mother had DNA tested, I would have known her great-great-grandparents, probably. Her grandchildren, my nieces and nephews, only carry 6.25% of that great-great-grandfather's DNA. The chances of them, just 2 generations removed, being able to find a great-great-grandfather or grandparent through a DNA match is disproportionately less. It's minuscule. And what a great legacy to leave them of proof by DNA that there's a biological relationship to that person and how that person came about. And just think about that. I mean, I'm talking about my nieces and nephews now. They have adult children who now have adult children. Those kids, if one of them gets interested in genealogy, has almost no chance of establishing a biological connection to my mother's great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather. So what else can you do for your DNA? Make sure you leave a legacy. Name a beneficiary of your tests and accounts, which each company that you have data at. And consider, if you've taken a Y-DNA test especially, consider making the project that you may belong to the beneficiary of your account. The Rutledge Surname Project, we have several testers who have now passed, whose family is not interested in genealogy or DNA, and we would like to upgrade their test, and we can't because we don't have the right. We're not beneficiaries of that, and we cannot control that DNA test. Always test to the highest level possible. As new tests come out and they become more granular, always test to the highest level that you can afford. Leave as much fresh sample as possible. If you are interested in Y-DNA and you're doing Y-DNA testing, and as you age, just all you have to do is call Family Tree DNA and tell them you have an elderly person, and they will send free sample collections and then put that in their collection file so that they have the freshest samples available. Now, samples don't last forever, but at least you're doing what you can to, like if you pass and we go from a big Y700 to all of a sudden a big Y900, you have a chance of contributing that DNA to that test. And spread your net wide. Upload your DNA test to as many sites as possible. Now, Ancestry, you have to take a test from them. 23andMe, you have to take a test. But you can upload to Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage, GEDmatch, Living DNA, what other companies come out there. There probably won't be very many more. Upload your test to as many places as you can, and as you age and you are no longer interested, if you have someone in your family who's interested, even if they're a distant cousin, make them the beneficiary of that account, put their email on it, and please keep your legacy alive for the future people who may match you, because you could be the grandparent or great-grandparent of someone who's trying to work on their genealogy. Which brings us right over to DNA matches. Leave your DNA match information. Leave details of your key matches. I take a screenshot of every match because I've had people get upset and delete their accounts. Keep details of the research you did to find those common ancestors and any correspondence that's really relevant to the match. Document your matches in your family tree software, whatever you use, Family Search, Ancestry, the one you use on your computer. Detail those matches. Document your matches in your family tree software. I put it under the person's name. And if you use any other programs to work your matches, make that available to others too. For example, I love painting. I use DNA Painter. It does a lot for me. I love it. It's relaxing. And you can see by this chart, and the match names are taken off the chart, but they normally would be on there. But I can show on chromosome 15, I have DNA matches to my 4th great-grandfather. So if someone matches me in this location on chromosome 15, it's very likely that that DNA came from my 4th great-grandfather or my 3rd great-grandfather. And that might help that person connect to other shared matches. Another thing I do as I'm proving different lines is use a McGuire chart. If you haven't heard of a McGuire chart, you need to go investigate them because it gives you an excellent visual of how you connect with your matches, and I refer to them often as I'm working matches. And you can see with this match, with this McGuire chart, which is a very simple McGuire chart, that I have proven because of matches and shared matches, my great-great-grandfather, this is actually a client's chart, his great-great-grandfather, and because of shared matches, we've proven his great-great-great-grandfather and his great-great-great-great-grandfather. Now that's really something for us. But think about what it's going to be for 2 or 3 generations below us. How excited would you be if you found a McGuire chart detailing the matches that your grandmother had or a distant cousin had to a multiple great-grandparent. Isn't that a great piece of breadcrumb that we can leave for our future generations? And of course, we can't talk about legacy without talking about the stories. What can you do to tell your story? You can write it on paper. You can leave video recordings. You can make a video with a camera so the people can see you. Or you can type it on the computer if you're still able to. But the things we want to know is how you felt about a topic or an event and its impact on you and those around you. We just lived through a horrible pandemic. How did that happen? How did it affect you? And I wish I'd started a diary. My sister actually did, detailing the struggles and the things that they saw and how it felt, because she lives she works for a retirement community, as they were locking people down and people couldn't visit them and people were dying. How that impacted her emotionally and physically. And don't forget your life skills learned. Don't forget the things that you did wrong as you were growing up, or even as an adult, and what you learned from that. And think too about those decisions that you made that made your life, in places that you lived and worked. Because as our ancestors moved around, sometimes we couldn't find them. So detail that. I would be a horrible person to try to track, because with my company, I moved 10 times in 14 years, and I never lived anywhere longer than 18 months. Now, I feel sorry for the genealogist in later years who's trying to find me and trying to figure out where I am years later. So I do have a document that details where I was working and what I was doing and the skill sets I had and some of the adventures I had along the way, because we had some great adventures while we were traveling all over the country in Hawaii. And some of the other things we did, and tidbits about the people that we met and the restaurants we loved and the things that happened, like when my husband was at a funeral near the Texas border. In the middle of the funeral, a helicopter gunship went over and there was firing and bullets being exchanged on the Rio Grande River because there was a fugitive down there. That was exciting, and I have his story. So let's talk now about a very simple thing you can do. Let's talk about identifying pictures. This picture on the left is James Z. Rutledge and his 7 sons. This is my great-great-grandfather. And Ernest, one of the sons, as he was getting older, one of my distant cousins had the foresight to ask Ernest to identify his brothers in the picture. All they did was take a Xerox copy of the picture, had Ernest identify him, and they put little labels by the people. So where are you going to put your stuff? Well, my Rawlings family information from my cousin who did the Rawlings family research is located in the Indiana State Library, because the family was from Pittsburgh outside of Indianapolis. My Rutledge family information is for the Indiana people, and the Ohio people is actually located in Fort Wayne, Indiana, in the Allen County Library, because it's a regional library. And it's also located in the Muncie, Indiana Library, because the Rutledges were in Muncie and still are in Muncie. And it's also, some of it is located in Muskingum County, Ohio, because that's where one of the brothers settled. Also look at state and university archives. For people in the panhandle of Florida, it's a pretty rural area. The University of West Florida has a very nice archives, and unbeknownst to us as a genealogy society, they will take any family information anyone wants to give them, because they realize there's a need for that in the area. If your people were Quakers, you might consider one of the Quaker colleges. If you might consider some other college that's close to where your family was, where they lived. So sit down and think about, if you were a researcher, where might you look for information on your family, and then contact those places and see what they'll take. I also have a website, but you know what the problem is with websites? Is when you die and no one pays the domain fees and their website fees anymore, that website goes away. We had some wonderful websites in our family. These guys put all their research up there, got research from other people. They were great websites, full of information, full of transcribed records, full of all sorts of stuff. After the man was dead a few years, the website's gone. So I want to leave you with just a couple of thoughts. First, how would your journey be different if your ancestors had left a trail? Wouldn't it be great if you knew your grandmother's or a distant cousin's DNA matches, knew that little bit inkling of information that they knew that would take you years to find out? But at the same time, remember, my research is a fascinating hobby. It keeps my mind active. It keeps me engaged. But it's my hobby. And those who follow me have no responsibility to continue my research. But I will attempt to leave crumbs for future generations, for that distant cousin who does not know me, and I have no inkling that they are there. For it is my legacy to leave a crumb for those who come behind.